Harley Quinn returned this week after one hell of a cliffhanger with a brand new episode entitled Bensonhurst. I'm Cape Joel, and you know the deal by now. This is the video series where I give my thoughts on the episode that was, as well as shouting out any comic book Easter eggs I can find. Now that we got that out of the way, let's move on. So, picking up from where last week left off, Harley is devastated following her breakup with her crew. It's gotten so bad she's stalking them on social media, imagining better times. It's here we get a nice little shout out to Bloodhaven, the comic book city that Nightwing is known for defending. Heck, Harley's in such a bad way right now, even a dumbass like Bane has more friends than her, and that's really saying something. Big joke points early on for Bane's coffee mug, saying it's caffeine's reckoning. In fact, Bane quotes himself from Dark Knight Rises several times in this episode. I will never stop loving the fact that despite all the pomp and circumstance that surrounded that movie when it came out, Dark Knight Rises' greatest legacy is that Bane talks like this. This episode also sees the return of Harley's sane inner monologue, who tells her to seek out the person who loves her more than anyone, loves her unconditionally. But wait, Harley can't get a hold of Ivy. She seems to be missing since the end of the previous episode. But isn't that something? When push comes to shove, Harley really does consider Ivy's love unconditional. And despite the fact that they're both career super criminals, they are, for the most part, the most healthy relationship either of them has. Speaking of, where is Poison Ivy, you might be wondering? Well, she got grabbed by guys in hazmat suits and now seems to be held captive somewhere waiting to be harvested. The guy doing the holding isn't so bad though. He's a kindergarten teacher who just kinda goons on the side so he can afford art supplies for his classroom, and man, that is one of those it's funny cause it's true and funny cause it's sad things to inject into the show. I like this guy. I hope he survives, even though Ivy does pretty much vow to kill him once she breaks free. And how does Ivy plan to escape? Well, in a nice call back to episode 1, we're reminded that it doesn't matter how small the piece of plant life is, Ivy can work her magic on it regardless, and with that she decides to send a message to Frank the plant to find Harley. Too bad Frank can't move and his weed man is already high off his ass, and if you think this is gonna lead to a big old comedy of errors, well, you would be 100% correct. The main event, though, is Harley, with nowhere left to turn, deciding to go back home to Bensonhurst and her mom. Bensonhurst, of course, being an actual real place in Brooklyn, and maybe also a real place in Gotham, too. They don't really bother to differentiate between the two. We briefly glimpsed Harley's family in episode 5 as kind of a takeoff on the Bundy family, but here they get to take center stage in a big way. And hey, let's talk about Harley's family for a second. They are an interesting case, to say the least. Even though they're mentioned a handful of times in the comics, there's precious little information actually written about them. This is probably because the DC universe gets rebooted every 5 to 8 years anyway, or because Paul Dini, the creator of Harley Quinn, never actually said anything concrete about the Quinzel, so they pretty much just keep changing with every new writer. Heck, Harley has like 2 other brothers that have been mentioned previously, but we only get to see the one deceased one, Barry, here in the episode. Her family also doesn't even have a section of their own in the big DC comic book wiki, and everyone gets a section in that wiki, so that should tell you how underwritten they actually are. Honestly though, that kind of ends up working out for the best in my mind, because it means the show is free to do whatever they want and really not be wrong in reimagining Harley's family. It seems like that when Harley was young, her deadbeat half-a-wise guy dad, voiced by the legendary Charlie Adler, who my generation will probably know from Cow and Chicken, and who also just so happens to be the vocal director of this show, forced her into taking a big dive during what was supposed to be her crowning gymnastics moment. Now, her mom Sharon, voiced by Curb Your Enthusiasm Susie Essman, seems to have taken Nick back. Geez, continuing to forgive and take back no good lovers. You gotta wonder where Harley learned it from, right? While we're on the subject of Harley's mom, let's take care of some old business, shall we? If you inhabit the same parts of comic book social media as I do, then you might recall a tweet a couple months ago gained some traction, claiming that the second episode of the Harley Quinn show was somehow anti-Semitic for making some Seinfeldish cracks about a supervillain bar mitzvah, or that they were playing down Harley's own occasional Jewishness. In fact, it got so many retweets, Justin Halford, the very Jewish showrunner of the Harley show, came out and apologized. Apologizing not only for himself, but for the very Jewish writer of that particular episode, saying that they might be self-deprecating, maybe even a little self-hating, but they're certainly not anti-Semitic. Well, surprise, surprise, as we discover in this episode, Harley's mother is indeed 100% Jewish, meaning Harley's own Judaism is intact. Well, isn't that something? Maybe if people actually watched the show instead of just watching clips out of context, then they wouldn't be so upset. They wouldn't get clear and obvious things wrong either. Alright, old business over, back to new business. Harley's not home for long when she ends up getting roped into helping her father settle a big mob debt, one so serious, in fact, they're sending hitmen to his home. The Bensonhurst mob is pretty damn funny in their own right. You start off thinking that they're just going to be Sopranos pastiches, only to realize that they're actually a little bit more self-aware. To combat this threat, Harley and her dad must team up to fight the mob and maybe just work through their issues along the way, or at least that's how this story would normally go in any other show, but this is Harley Quinn and it loves bucking trends. You see, by the time a second assassin comes knocking, it becomes clear that Harley's dad was never actually the target. Someone took out a massive bounty on her head, and now deadbeat dad wants to claim it for herself. And mom Sharon, she has no problem with this. Heck, she thinks Harley shamed the family for becoming a supervillain and getting involved with the Joker, again, with absolutely zero hint of irony or self-awareness on her part. It was a pretty bold choice in my mind to make Harley's parents such unrepentant scumbags, but it only serves to further illustrate just how far Harley has actually come as a person and a character. In fact, by sparing her horrible parents, Harley proves that while she is very much their daughter, she's still a better class of criminal than they ever could be, because, well, she has friends and connections and lives by an actual code. What's crazy about this episode too is that by the end, Ivy still isn't saved, which means we get a ticking clock for Harley heading into episode 11, and I can't wait to see how it all shakes out. In summation, Bensonhurst is an episode that wrings great comedic material out of putting an off-the-wall character like Harley into the boring world of suburbia. It's a tried-and-true storytelling trick, but the genius comes in flipping this kind of story on its head, not once but multiple times throughout. Much like last week, I think this episode succeeds in boiling Harley down to what made people like her so much in the comics, that being that Harley's life is funny, but that her life is also tragic, garnished with some continuity gags like the return of Penguin's nephew, and you have yourself another standout episode. And so that'll just about do it for me, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to check back again same time next week and we can do it all over again. Until then, bye-bye.